Today we are going to talk about 7 important signs that Jesus is coming soon, some of which you may not have heard before. Now, Jesus is very clear that we cannot know the day or hour of his coming. However, Jesus gave that warning after giving several very specific signs of his return. In fact, a few verses earlier, Jesus even says that when these signs take place, we will know that he is just around the corner. Now learn the parable from the fig tree. As soon as its branch has become tender and sprouts its leaves, you know that summer is near. So you too, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near, right at the door. In Matthew 24, Jesus gives a big overview of the most major signs of his return. However, these aren't the only signs. Other parts of the Bible talk about the conditions immediately prior to his return. Therefore, we can use this information and compare it to the world around us and see how history is moving towards the return of Christ. The first sign we are going to talk about is the progress on the Great Commission. Jesus said, "This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come." The Greek word for nation is ethnos. Therefore, Jesus is referring to the various ethnic groups among the Gentiles, not political nations. As a result, people of every ethnic group must hear the gospel before Jesus comes back. Throughout history, the spread of the gospel has not kept up with global population growth, which is why some breakthrough is needed to finally finish the task. Fortunately, the internet has revolutionized evangelism. A Christian missionary organization, Global Media Outreach, is already using the internet to reach people for Christ. They use paid advertising to send the message of Jesus to people all around the world. As a result, 2 billion people have visited one of their pages containing the gospel message. The Jesus Film Project intends to reach 2.6 billion people with the gospel by 2025, using a combination of internet evangelism and television broadcasting. They have Christ-centered videos in over 1,800 languages. Their website states that over 490 million people have come to Christ through their videos. However, there are still 4 billion people who do not have the internet. Nevertheless, GSMA Intelligence estimates that 90% of the world will have internet by 2030. However, this estimate may be a little too low. This is the case because businesses like Starlink, OneWeb, and Amazon intend to blanket the Earth with satellite internet over the next few years. Elon Musk's company, Starlink, has already launched over 1,000 internet satellites into space. When everyone on Earth has the internet, it will be much easier for these ministries to finally reach everyone with the gospel. Which leads us to our second sign, a worldwide video communication system. Revelation 11 talks about 2 prophets which will emerge in the end times. However, the Antichrist will kill them after 3.5 years. The text says that people from a vast array of ethnic groups will stare at their dead bodies for 3.5 days. Revelation 11:9 says, "Those from the peoples, tribes, languages, and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and will not allow their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb." How can people from such a wide array of ethnic groups stare at their dead bodies without a global video communication system? Such a global video communication system is already in progress. Many people in the world already have the internet, smartphones, or television. However, satellite internet will make this much more possible on a global scale. The third sign is the rebirth of Israel. Ezekiel 38 through 39 teaches that the Jews will be regathered to Israel in the end times. Ezekiel 38:8b says, "Whose inhabitants have been gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel, which had been a continual place of ruins. But its people were brought out from the nations, and they are living securely, all of them." This regathering takes place after a long exile. Elsewhere, in Ezekiel 39, it says, "The nations will know that the house of Israel went into exile for their wrongdoing, because they were disloyal to me, and I hid my face from them. So I handed them over to their adversaries, and all of them fell by the sword." In 1948, Israel became a nation after a long period of war-torn exile, just like the Bible predicted. However, Israel is not the only nation that will be reborn in the end times, which leads us to point number 4, the rebirth of the Roman Empire. Daniel 2 and 7 teach that there will be 4 empires that rise up in world history, one after another. In chapter 7, Daniel sees a vision of these 4 empires symbolized by 4 beasts that come up out of the Great Sea, which is the Mediterranean. Daniel 2 identifies the first empire as Babylon. Daniel 5 tells us that the Medo-Persian Empire came after the Babylonian Empire. Furthermore, Daniel 8 says that Greece came after the Medo-Persian Empire. This leaves the 4th empire, which came after Greece. This was none other than the Roman Empire. It was terrifying and violent, just like Daniel 7 describes. Dr. John Walvoord, former president of Dallas Theological Seminary, states that conservative scholars with few exceptions generally identify the fourth beast as Rome. Daniel 7 says that God violently destroys the final ruler of the Roman Empire when he sets up his eternal kingdom, led by the Messiah. Daniel 7:27 says, "Then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the empires will serve and obey him." But this poses a serious problem. The Roman Empire fell in 476 AD. It was not violently destroyed by God, setting up a global kingdom in its place. Therefore, in order for this prophecy to come true, the Roman Empire must be reborn in the end times. This is why people like Dr. John Walvoord and Dr. John MacArthur anticipate the revival of the Roman Empire. Many theologians are well aware that this is taking place in the European Union. Some of these Bible teachers and pastors include David Jeremiah, Tony Evans, and the late Charles Ryrie. The European Union has many features of the end times Roman Empire. First, it was founded at the Treaty of Rome. It makes its own laws, has its own currency, and has its own legislature, the European Parliament. You might find this unlikely, since the EU is not very strong and is very divided. Yet this is exactly what the Bible predicts about the end times Roman Empire. Daniel 2 describes in detail how the end times Roman Empire will be marred by weakness and division. In particular, verse 41 says that it will be a divided kingdom. This is indicated by Brexit and the European debt crisis, which almost tore the Eurozone apart. Yet the Bible predicts that the final leader of the end times Roman Empire will be a powerful military leader. Which brings us to our fifth sign, European military unification. Even though the end times Roman Empire starts off as weak and divided, it will go on to become the most powerful military force in the world. The book of Daniel says this about the Antichrist. He will take action against the strongest of fortresses. Furthermore, Daniel 11:40-45 describes his various military conquests. When the Antichrist finally completes his rise to power, the whole world will be amazed, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him?" In order for the Antichrist to have so much military might, his empire must first become an immense military power. Slowly but surely, Europe has become more and more militarily unified. In 2000, the EU was finally given the ability to launch its very own military operations around the world. In 2001, military operations were also put under a single leadership structure. In 2009, the EU upgraded the kinds of military operations it could do under the Common Security and Defense Policy. In 2017, the EU got its very own military headquarters. As of 2017, the EU started building its own defense spending programs, where member countries could develop new weapons together. This led to a full-blown European Defense Fund as of 2021. Although the EU oversees military operations once they are launched, the EU as an organization still doesn't have the power to go to war. However, many officials inside the EU want it to become a fully fledged military power, or European Defense Union. There's even talk of giving the EU control of France's nukes. European military unification usually goes fairly slowly. However, it is destined to finish, because God has decreed as much. Eventually, the Antichrist will invade Israel. When describing his military conquests, Daniel 11:41 says, "He will also enter the beautiful land." Here, beautiful land is a term for Israel. However, there will come a time when every country, not just the Antichrist empire, will attack Jerusalem. Which leads to our sixth sign, illegal Jewish settlements. Zechariah 14:2-3 says, "For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be taken, the houses plundered, the women raped, and half of the city exiled, but the rest of the people will not be eliminated from the city. Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations, as when he fights on a day of battle." Jesus also talks about a time when the residents of Judea, which is in southern West Bank, must flee to the mountains prior to the second coming. Matthew 24:16-18 says, "Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get things out of his house, and whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak." But why would the Jews be exiled from only half of Jerusalem, like Zechariah says? Also, why do only those in Judea need to flee to the mountains? The answer may lie in contemporary international politics. As of right now, it is against international law for Jews to live in the eastern half of Jerusalem. It is also illegal for Jews to live in Judea, which is their historic homeland. This is because the UN believes that East Jerusalem and Judea, southern West Bank, are the location of a future Palestinian state. It is obvious that the Jews have every right to live in their historic homeland. But you can see how the international community, and the Antichrist himself, will use this as an excuse to attack Israel in the end times. As the EU has said in the recent past, as stated in UN Security Council Resolution 2334, 2016, the establishment by Israel of settlements in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem, has no legal validity and constitutes a flagrant violation of international law and a major obstacle to the achievement of the two-state solution and a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace. The Antichrist won't start off as Israel's enemy, which leads to our seventh and final sign, the EU's 7-year contract with Israel. The Bible also predicts that the Antichrist will confirm a 7-year contract with Israel. Daniel 9:27a says, "And he will confirm a covenant with the many for 1 week." In this passage, 1 week is indisputably a week of years, based on context. Furthermore, it is made with Israel. We know this because the entire prophecy is decreed for the Jews and Jerusalem. Finally, it will contain a promise that the Antichrist will not invade Israel. This last part isn't in Daniel 9, but we know it because of other passages, such as Isaiah 28:15. "Because you have said, 'We have made a covenant with death, and with Sheol we have made a pact. The gushing flood will not reach us when it passes by, because we have made falsehood our refuge, and we have concealed ourselves with deception.'" Many books and movies about the end times portray a European Antichrist making a 7-year peace treaty with Israel. This has also been widely anticipated by theologians and Bible scholars. Herbert Lockyer said in 1964, "And he, the Roman prince, head of the revived Roman Empire, shall confirm the covenant with many of the people of Israel for 1 week, 7 years." In 2007, the EU launched its first 7-year contract with Israel and many other countries, under the European Neighborhood Policy. This program is cyclical, renewing every 7 years. In 2018, the EU's executive branch proposed merging most EU foreign aid into one big mega fund. This new program will finance the European Neighborhood Policy and most other foreign aid from January 1st, 2021 to December 31st, 2027. The Antichrist could very well use a future cycle to confirm his non-aggression treaty with Israel. Prophecy in the Bible is meant to give us hope. The day is coming when God is going to restore everything to the way it should be. As it says in Isaiah, "Then the eyes of those who are blind will be opened, and the ears of those who are deaf will be unstopped. Then those who limp will leap like a deer, and the tongue of those who cannot speak will shout for joy. For waters will burst forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert." Furthermore, all of God's people will rise from the dead at the return of Christ. As Jesus himself says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, a time is coming, and even now has arrived, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live." Because of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, everyone who puts their faith in him receives forgiveness of sins through him. As it says in Isaiah 53, "But he was pierced for our offenses, he was crushed for our wrongdoings. The punishment for our well-being was laid upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. All of us like sheep have gone astray, each of us has turned to his own way, but the Lord has caused the wrongdoing of us all to fall on him." As the Apostle Paul says, that if you confess with your mouth Jesus as Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. All these wonderful things await those who are in Christ. Now the question remains, are you ready?